Huddle around as Climbing the Pocket Network presents Jayson and the boys talking everything Minnesota Vikings. Watch the countdown timer.
Away we go again. Lost like I'm lost on purpose. If found, please return to. Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before when I get home, Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before when I get home, My vision blurry, I'm paying the cost. I'm not enough. In fact, it's even better when you're not involved. When I miss your call, I feel that I evolve. Cause at your mention, I am more dependent than a college student on their parents or an old person on their pension. Not to mention, when you hit me on WhatsApp without attention, and a bad booty bitch walks in, she looks tempting. Look, my Achilles heel is when I said what I feel, you said, baby, come home, and I don't think that I will, cause all this motherfucking stress is gonna get me killed. Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before when I get home, Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before when I get home,
Huddle around as Climbing the Pocket Network presents Jayson and the boys talking everything Minnesota Vikings.
No, I can't play these games. No, you can't disrespect and call me names. Sending me signals like you about to switch lanes. Well, go on, do your thing. Go on, do your thing. I mix champagne and propane, get lit. I'm trying to forget all the things that you said, all the things that we did. Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before when I get home, Girl, don't you know I'm lost on the road? I've been here before when I get home, Watch the breakdown. And I get home when I get home. You just gonna act like we normal now. Good luck. Don't you try to call me with that bullshit, telling me you're sorry. You act too quick. That's somebody else's problem now. You're somebody else's problem now. Don't you try to call me with that bullshit, telling me you're sorry. You act too quick. That's somebody else's problem now. You're somebody else's problem now.
All right, we are back. Almost a full crew. Nick's not here, but we got the man, hardest working person on Tuesdays in all of America, Dr. Eric Eager, back for another episode. My man, how you doing? How you been?
Things are okay. Would have liked to see a better game Sunday, but we're moving forward. I always tell myself every single time, this time every week, that somehow we made it to week 12 of the NFL season, which is crazy to think about.
It is wild, and I lied. We won't get to him yet. We still don't know if he can hear us or not. Nick is here, so we'll see in a little bit how this goes. But first up, the proud owner of a maybe PS5, Myles. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. We're living it now. I got it. I'll get to pick it up on Sunday, so we're cooling now.
There we go.
But I don't get to play till Christmas though.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, it's a Christmas gift. The wife, man, she makes the rules.
Oh man, that's rough. Okay, well, let's
I'll
see.
give
Like,
you
well, we might take some action at the end of the show to see if that PS5 actually stays wrapped up until Christmas time or not. But now it's the moment of
Miles,
truth. Let's see. Let us see if Nick can actually hear us. Nick Olson, are you here? Can you hear us? Will you be
radio
joining
silence.
us live on today's program?
Miles, if you wait till Christmas, that might actually give them enough time to make a good game for that system.
Oh,
Damn,
and
That's
hating
a
already.
blessing in disguise.
Hater. You're an Xbox guy, huh? Hater.
yeah, and there it is. So we have Nick on Skype, but we do not have Nick on sound. So we will move on to the man. Do we have his music queued up? There it is, Mr. Flipmazzi.
I remember the question last week to end the podcast. Jay, you asked if the Vikings were the 10th best team or the 18th best team in the NFL. I don't want to collect too many receipts, but
Isn't the answer just yes?
So Eric, you weren't here, but we decided to test your numbers versus DVOA in a 1-game sample size using the Vikings, because going into last week, DVOA had the Vikings ranked 10th. PFF Elo had the Vikings ranked 18th, and we did a quick rapid fire, and maybe Flipmazzi was the man who correctly stated we don't know which Vikings team is going to show up week over week, and that is why he couldn't rank them as a top 10 NFL team.
Thank you. We had Dallas on the money line and against the spread last week, on our predictive model. I think, again, because you can't – I mean, the Vikings are just such a fragile team, right? And there's so many good things about them, but there are a number of things that keep me, again, from putting – but the hard part is look at the entire NFC. I think any team in the NFC, save Philly, Detroit, I'm trying to think of all but 3 teams in the NFC could beat all but the other 3 teams. You know what I'm saying? The Vikings could beat Tampa. You watch that team last night? The Vikings could beat Tampa for sure. They could also lose to Dallas with Andy Dalton, evidently. So it's really hard to I think some, especially DVOA, sort of responds too sharply to the most immediate thing. That would be my statement on that.
So, Eric, I mean, you mentioned it. You had kind of your Dallas and your predictive modeling. Help us understand what made you feel that way outside of our sentiments that you just can't trust the Vikings to do what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it. What analytically led you to the prediction that, the Vikings were going to do what the Vikings often do to us in these situations when we expect them to, really lock in the run and actually give us real hope as opposed to you beat Detroit hope?
Well, I always say don't, and I learned this from my friend Seren Petro, you don't coach a bet. Don't coach a prediction. If I were in charge of the Vikings, they would, and I'm not going to say this, but if the Vikings threw the ball as much as I wanted them to, they probably would win more games, and the problem, and it's with Tennessee, I'm saying, I think Tennessee has a chance to beat Indy this week, but if they run the ball as much as they want to on early downs, they can get buried right away. And so the Vikings have the raw materials to be the 10th best team in the NFL. I agree. I believe that with all my heart. But the problem is, they played right into the last 2 defenses that faced them by giving the ball to Cook too many times. And they let the other team earn too much slack defensively by pushing all of the chips onto late downs. And against the Bears, it was excellent because they were 5 for 5 for 102 yards throwing to Justin Jefferson. And against Dallas, it was just a little more noisy. And then you go to the other side of the ball. Dallas has 3 really good wide receivers, and Minnesota has 3 really inexperienced defensive backs and almost no pass rush. And you look at it worked against Chicago because Chicago couldn't figure out that on every third down they were blitzing 2 or 3 guys up the A gap, and they never had anything, hot. To Dallas's credit, they had hot things that they could throw to off of those blitzes, and it put the Vikings defense in a real bind. And, unfortunately, that's like what happened. I mean, they couldn't stop, Dalton's not a bad quarterback, especially if you put the 3 receivers in front of him. And unfortunately, the Vikings, they struggle covering. I think most teams have struggled covering against that group too. When Dak was the quarterback, they were one of the highest scoring teams in the league. So it was bound to regress at least a little bit back to that.
Yeah, I think the issue with me on that Vikings game is just I wasn't surprised by any of it. I wasn't surprised by what the offense did. I wasn't surprised by what the defense did. Fans get so over their skis on a week-to-week basis without actually looking at quality of opponent. And peace. What's up? What's up? Just like
Chloe wants to be a star. So,
oh man, we got to get her on that AWS commercial.
She'd be the first eager on a AWS commercial.
Is that the quarterback or is that the receiver that's just trying to be the star?
The wide receiver. Chloe, come say hi. Okay. No, come on, sit up. No, okay.
No, budding star. But anyways, the point is, look, if your defense shuts down the Bears offense, you get zero credit for that. That doesn't give you that shouldn't give you any sense of confidence or any expectation that we can shut down the Cowboys offense just because we shut down the Bears offense. And so much of the season has been quality of opponent. Who did we actually beat? And you look at that and you're just not impressed by what the Vikings have done, maybe outside of the Packers game. The Vikings were never going to win 6 straight. Never. It was just not going to happen. They're too variable. They're too inconsistent. They have too many holes on different parts of this team to make that happen. And this Sunday, it was the defensive secondary and the pass rush that reared its ugly head.
Well, and you touch on all great points. Like everybody was talking about, why are you guys being so negative when the Vikings were 3-5, 4-5? Well, we're like, they're still not 500, and they're still in a situation where they're not playing good teams. So like, if you just flipped the Falcons and Packers game, I think the narrative would be a lot different than what we're seeing, because they're still not beating. They beat one good team, but what we've seen from the Packers is, like most of the NFC teams most of the NFC teams that are near the top of the division of the standings, they're all inconsistent. Nobody wants to take the reins and take over the conference. Like nobody seems to want to do it. So when the Vikings beat the Packers, you're like, okay, that makes sense. Like the Vikings on any given day could beat any team in the NFC, just like Eric pointed out, most teams could beat any other team on any given week. And again, back to Eric's point about throwing the football, we watched Monday night, the Rams beat the Tampa Bay Bucks, and they ran the ball like 10 times. And they have a quarterback in Jared Goff who's probably not as good as Kirk Cousins or on the same tier as Kirk Cousins. Like, why are they able to do those types of things against a team that's arguably just overall better than they are? Like, I would say the Tampa Bay Bucks are a better football team than the LA Rams. I mean, it's close. I mean, you can nitpick here and there, I think. But I think as an overall roster, I would say Tampa Bay is probably better in my opinion. But the Rams went into that game knowing we can't run the football against this team, even though we want to. So let's just make sure we're using different ways to run the football, like quick screens. We do the motions like we do all the time with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. That worked like a charm. That the quick screens, the quick handoffs, the reverses, all that stuff. They do it constantly. That's where I would like to see the Vikings get more innovative, is the fact that the run game isn't always going to work, and it's not always going to be successful, and you're not always going to win football games. And when you can't win football games because you can't run the football, it tells you everything you need to know about your team. So,
but that's not why they lost this last game.
No, and that's the bigger picture. Looking back at the Dallas game, honestly, it was such an even game. Most of the way, it was kind of like who was going to flinch first. That was kind of what happened. Like they both had turnovers. They both, both made mistakes. The Vikings special teams unit is terrible. They're both similar. Like what's crazy is they're more similar than they think they are. Then like Vikings fans went into that game with their noses up against the Cowboys, thinking we're way better than this team. And even I said they should rout this team. And you went and watched that game. That game was a lot more even from both sides of the football than you would have liked it to be from a Vikings perspective. The Vikings should have been a better team, but they weren't. And overall, like the Cowboys have probably slightly better weapons than the Vikings. It's pretty close. They're both some of the top weapons in the league when you look at the entire top down from receivers, tight ends, running backs, what have you. But then the defensive side was the side that you didn't expect the Cowboys to be the ones favoring over the Vikings. I thought the Vikings were going to play a better sound defense than the Cowboys, but that wasn't the case. The Cowboys ended up, when it counted the most, playing the better defense. So it was one of those games, and then we let Zeke Elliott have his first 100-yard game of the season. It's like first 100-yard game in what, like a year and a half? Like, I mean,
extra
come on.
Salt in the wound for Eric right there.
Right,
Zeke Elliott,
exactly.
Zeke Elliott showing up in the game against the Vikings. But there's a couple things that have popped up, and the Flip, I feel like, might have been alluding to one that gets thrown around a little bit, is that part of the reason that we need to run the ball as much as we do is that our defense isn't good and our offensive line aren't good. And so we have to protect them. And I am curious if that's actually a thing.
But how bad is the offensive line? Because we look at I think it's not consistent. I think that's a big thing. But like Riley Reif's probably having a career year overall or close to it. Brian O'Neill's been good. He's going to be a guy that they're going to pay $15+ million a year to. Brad Berry's taken a step up. Like we know his pass blocking grade hasn't been anything to write home about, but he's progressed. They've been able to find success at right guard after the Drew Samia experiment ended. And then Dakota Dozier is probably the worst offensive lineman on the team in terms of starters. But I'm just trying to find out, like, based off of what they run and what they do for their offense, how the offensive line is still this like major weakness. Well, maybe there's just something I'm missing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not when they play from ahead, right? When they play, and I don't mean like ahead on the scoreboard. I mean ahead insofar as what they're trying to do as an offense. When they can run on early downs, so when there's a credible threat of running the football, the offense is better. The offensive line is better. That doesn't mean that they and frankly, if they are the 10th best team in the NFL and Dallas is the 25th best team in the NFL or 27th, they shouldn't be running the ball to protect anything. Like that's I think of like the basketball analogy, like you want to take as many shots as possible so that the thing that's supposed to happen happens more frequently. And that's the problem is the Vikings play like a team that isn't very good.
Well,
and so
yeah.
And then the other issue, I talked about this earlier today, like they play a certain way the whole game. And then when they have to come from behind, they have to play an entirely different style of football. And maybe that's one of the reasons why people are like, why isn't Kirk Cousins clutch? Well, Kirk Cousins has never been in an offense where the predominant thing that they do is play out a shotgun and throw the football as the first thing. We watch that game on Sunday night, and both the Raiders and Kansas City, that's how they want to play football. So at the end of the game, when the Raiders are coming back on the Chiefs, they're comfortable because that's how they play the game. And then even the biggest example is when Kansas City's coming back on Las Vegas, they're comfortable because that's how they want to play their games too. And with Kirk, it's like they play this like Matt Schaub, Sage Rosenfels, broke-ass Peyton Manning at the end of his career offense, like all game. And, most of the time, like that works, right? Most of the time they're good enough. Kirk makes plays and they're good enough to like have a lead, especially last season. We saw it when they're playing the David Blows and the Chase Daniels and the Derek Carrs of the world. But then when they get stuck from behind, we saw it against Kansas City. We saw it against, some of the other teams that they had to face, San Francisco, fish out of water in the playoffs. When they have to play left-handed like that, they look worse. And then we sort of say, well, Kirk's not clutch. Well, no, Kirk just doesn't play in an offense that is conducive to being clutch. And I think it's a little bit different than that. Like Kirk played great the other day, but he played a different ball game than he had to play at the end of the game. And unfortunately, because some things broke down around him, he wasn't able to overcome it.
Yeah. And I don't think it's just Kirk. I think we need to really key on that point that the Vikings offense wins on unpredictability. When they can be balanced and have the defense on their heels, they can move the ball and they can score points. But the second the defense knows that it's a run play, the run game gets shut down. And the second the defense knows that a pass game is coming, that's when you see the guards get blown up. That's when you see Kirk Cousins struggling. So it's you look at other teams around the league, when Pat Mahomes drops back to pass, everybody knows he's passing. It's not a surprise, and he still succeed. The Titans, even like everyone knows they want to run the ball down people's throats. The Titans still succeed when they're trying to run the ball. They just have the will, and they exert that on opposing teams. But the Vikings, once that unpredictability is gone, I mean, Eric and I think everyone here, you can tell how the Vikings are lined up sometimes, whether it's a run or a pass. You can almost tell. You can start to see when that play action pass is coming. And
they don't window dress at all.
No, and when you're down by 4 with 1:43 left, everybody knows that pass is coming. And that's when I've just never seen that magic of being able to say, here's what we want to do, and it's coming, and we're just going to do it anyways.
To answer David's question,
how do we fix it, Flip?
I mean, we already named a podcast over what I would do, but I think it's just so weird how the entire thing has shifted from issues with Kirk to issues with the defense. I asked myself, how do I know, like, let's say I've got an old 20-year-old car. How do I know that it's time to get a new car? It's not when one thing goes wrong with the car. It's not when the headlights go out, or it's not when I need a new battery, or it's not when, the radiator gets out. I can rip those things one-on-one. But over the course of 3 months, if all these 3 things are breaking on my car on a weekly basis, that's when you're just like, okay, I'm sick of trying to plug a hole here, plug a hole there. I just got to go buy a new car. And that's what this Minnesota Vikings team is.
Trying to put a new radio system into a 1970s car, so that don't work.
It's a perfect analogy to what's happening, though, because like even if you think about, so Jayson's blessed because he lives in Canada, a far superior country to what we're living in. But like when you take precautionary steps, when you think about the future, things cost less when bad things happen, right? Because you have a safety net, you have insurance, you have things that make sense, right? When you live close to the edge, like we kind of do as a country, and things go badly, every single thing that happens costs more. Yannick Ngakoue costs a second when you don't take the time to actually develop young edge players. Drew Samir, or like Garrett Bradbury costs a first-round pick when you don't care to have a backup center that you sort of rear the way that old Vikings teams did with Matt Burke and Jeff Christie and Joe Berger, even so on and so forth. Things cost more when you don't have a plan. And the problem that I have sometimes with the Vikings is almost everything has cost more than it should because they didn't have a plan.
Quarterback especially.
Yeah, think about. And look, it's not the Vikings' fault that Teddy Bridgewater got hurt. It was the Vikings' fault that their backup quarterback at the time was Sean Hill. That meant that the quarterback that they actually had to play cost them a first-round pick, like at the buzzer, right? Like that's planning. That's a planning problem. All kinds of things are just more expensive when you don't have a process and you don't have a plan. And while I think they're not as bad as some teams, obviously, like it shows up in situations like this, just like with Flip's car. Like you could either spend $2,000 to repair every single thing on that car, or you can just buy a new car and get a warranty and like plan for and go and get oil changes and eventually that's a long-term positive play relative to what you're doing.
So Eric, I think that you've made the point and you've talked about it. So at this point, like earlier it was about Kirk. I feel like in one of the group messages it might have been about Spielman, Zim, with the play style and like how we've chosen to go out. When we look at the Vikings now, do we think that they're optimizing to like win it big or lose more slowly? Like stability, when you hear stability, do you think of them trying to win it all? Or is it like folks are, and I can't blame, I'm never going to blame anyone for trying to keep their job. So like, that's not what this is, but does it feel like more that we are optimizing now to in games, like lose the game more slowly? Like, I don't want to go for it here because like, then the game might be out of hand sooner. So is that kind of what it feels like the Vikings are doing, maybe from like a team building perspective, or even how we choose to run our offense perspective? We're like, yeah, we should be taking more shots, but if we run it this way, the game might look good for a longer period of time.
I mean, look at all the Vikings coaches that have gotten fired. Okay. Frazier got fired because they had a 5-10 in one season and it was like 1-7, right away. Right.
And he lost the locker room.
That eyesore is unacceptable. Brad Childress got fired 1 year into his contract extension because they lost 33-3 against Green Bay. Like it's in the Vikings experience, getting blown the fuck out is Dennis Green got fired after they lost like 33-0 against Jacksonville in 2001. Like the self-preservation is for them is if we win, great. But the thing that we don't want to do is get blown out in these games, or the thing that we don't want to do is have these big name signings completely fall flat. And unfortunately what that yields is, I think, probably decision-making that's suboptimal. Like, we don't want the Dalvin Cook signing to look terrible, so let's get him a rushing title this year, right? Let's lift that trophy so that we can go back to the Wilfs and say, your money was, I was a good steward of your money. Only one team wins a Super Bowl per year, and chances are it's not going to be us, but here's all these other things I got you. And,
Justin
unfortunately,
Dalvin Cook, yep.
Yeah, Kirk threw for another 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. How bad could it be? How bad of a decision maker could I have been?
It's a fill the seat strategy.
Save our job strategy. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Vikings have been this good for a long time, and the fans probably want something else.
Yeah.
Well, and under Zimmer, they're never going to be atrocious. Like, they're bad this year, but they're not obviously the Jets or like some of these other really bad football teams, the Lions. They're not those teams, but they're always going to be like, this is where I talk about the inconsistency under Mike Zimmer. And it's not just Zimmer's fault, but Zimmer can't sustain repeatable, even playoff trips. It's been an every year thing under Mike Zimmer. And I know there's been various reasons why, but it's always an excuse of why they're not consistently in the playoffs, but they're never 4-12, 5-11. They're always going to hover in that 7 to 8 to 9 range, or they're going to have that season where they're winning 10, 11 games and going to the playoffs. But it's never going to be, completely tear down bad. So Zimmer's at least put that baseline in, so people have that confidence that, well, at least we got next year. There's always it might not have worked this year, but we know it'll work next year because that's just how it works. They're so good at retooling themselves to make a run. Yes, exactly. And making a run the following year that it flies by them the following year again because they don't know how to sustain it.
It's why, in my opinion, Brad Childress was a lot better than we gave him credit for. And the reason being is that Childress took a team that was 9-7, took a team that just had beaten the Packers in the playoffs and tore it down and built it his way. Now, he failed, but ultimately he shot for the moon. And I'll never fault him for that, right? Dennis Green consistently changed the quarterback that the Vikings were playing with. He went to the playoffs with, Gannon, Salisbury, Moon, McMahon, Johnson, Cunningham, Culpepper, Jeff George. He he wasn't afraid to like shoot for the moon, and he knew that if he was going to win, he was going to have to beat San Francisco or Dallas or Green Bay. And to me, that's how you have to go about it. And if you strike out, you're going to strike out. But like only one out of every 32 teams wins in the NFL during the course of this season, and at least take a shot at it. 8-8. Like at this point, the Vikings have been really good for 40 years. But they haven't gotten close, other than a few years. And you really do want to see them actually like shoot for the moon a few times, as opposed to just try to get the ball on the green a little bit.
Well, that's all they do, though. All they do is shoot for the moon. One season here, one season there. That's how it always is.
Not even. It's just high floor, low ceiling. Look. Mike Zimmer is getting bailed the fuck out by Gary Kubiak this season because Jayson, one of our first talks when it came to the Minnesota Vikings, I mean, we're back talking 2015, 2016 here, is how they needed to prioritize investment in offense since they have a defensive coach, prioritize investment in offense, and use your defensive coaching skills, his scheme skills, his teaching skills, his development skills to field a competent defensive team, even though he doesn't have all the pieces in place. And we've seen that happen on other championship teams. We saw Bill Belichick he'd win the Super Bowl and then he'd trade his best defender the next year. We saw Alex Reed, an offensive guru, go to the playoffs multiple times with Alex Smith before he got Patrick Mahomes. You see what Kyle Shanahan did last year. His offense was better, significantly better than an offense with Jimmy Garoppolo should be. So now in Minnesota, we have a defense that, sure, they're hurt. Sure, they've got some missing pieces, but they're supposed to have one of the best defensive coaches in the motherfucking league. And the fact that he can't give us, I'm not expecting a top 5 defense, but give me the 15th best defense in the league, and we'd be cooking right now. We'd have a winning record. Give me a 12 to 15, an average defense with the offense we have, and Mike Zimmer can't even do that. So if Mike Zimmer can't do that, what is he doing? If he needs a first round cornerback,
excuse why he gets to be here next year.
And he was bailed out also by Pat Shurmur in 2017, who did masterful work with a backup quarterback they lost Dalvin Cook as much as Dalvin certainly is better than Murray and McKinnon were, and they lost him in week 4. They were 2-2, and that Monday night game in Chicago where Bradford could barely walk. I mean that team was not an NFC Championship caliber team. And then they hook Bradford. They put in Keenum. Keenum plays well. They win, 11 of 12 or whatever, 10 of 11 down the stretch. Like he's been buoyed in many ways by some pretty good performances by offenses and offensive coordinators. Right. And to your point, Flip, when the tables turn, you could almost never win with a number 1 defense and like the 15th best offense. That offense that they had with Keenum was like 7th. And that was almost good enough. You look at Kansas City last year, their defense was like 31st, 32nd in 2018. They get Spagnuolo in there. They get a couple better players, Frank Clark, Tyrann Mathieu. They get to like 15th on defense. And the bar when you have that kind of offense is 1 or 2 stops a game, really. Like 1 or 2 stops a game, and the offense. That's all the Chiefs got the other night against the Raiders. Yeah. They got 1 4th and 1 where they had to kick a field goal and 1 stop at the end of the half. And the rest of the game was basically like, let's end the game with the ball in Mahomes' hands. And like, that's just a more sustainable way of winning. When you try to win with defense, it's like betting a 10-team parlay. And every one of those bets has to hit for you to be good. And in 2017, 9 of those 10 bets hit, right? The 10th bet was beating Nick Foles in Philadelphia on the road, and they couldn't do it.
And you got out.
The same thing with the Jacksonville Jaguars the same year. They almost did the exact same thing. And unfortunately, the Vikings are probably winning 7 of 10 of those bets in 18, probably 7 of 10 of those bets in 19. And then this year they're like 2-8. But the result is still the same.
But my point is, like, Mike Zimmer hasn't even built a good defense here. I mean, any any NFL team, any NFL franchise can build the defense we've had if they're going to draft a cornerback every other year and draft a linebacker, 2 linebackers in the first and second round. They've only developed along the defensive line. They had to, sign Linval Joseph there to a big deal.
Wise.
Okay, resource-wise.
Okay.
Resource-wise.
When you said he didn't build a good defense, I was like, hold up. But now that you
they just threw money at all Mike Zimmer did is come here and say we need to spend on defense. And that's the only reason our defense was good. Because here's what happens when the resources aren't there. He hasn't been able to coach up to what we thought his ability was, which is just another reason why he's got to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's mixed at best, right? Because Frazier drafted Harrison Smith, Frazier drafted Sharif Floyd, Frazier drafted Rhodes, and the 2015 draft was the highest drafted corner in the history of the Vikings franchise is Trey Waynes, and he ended up an average player on the Vikings. The corner that they actually drafted
of that core draft.
Yeah, and he was the worst pick of that draft, right? And then, then they had Kendricks, and then they had, but they've also been bailed out by luck. And they're no different than any other team. We're not picking on the Vikings. This is the same shit that happens to every team. The Packers, this is why the Packers have only won 1 Super Bowl during the Rodgers era. They thought that they could outdraft everybody early, and they got cocky. And then now look at Rodgers is throwing to Marquez Valdez-Scantling when the game's on the line. Like, it's the same stuff that happens to every team. When you get lucky in those drafts, when you hit on Diggs, when you hit on Hunter, Kendricks, all those players in the same draft, you got to cash in. And the problem is when you consistently slough off at the quarterback position or the offensive coordinator position, or you leave those things to chance, unfortunately, like it's just a lot harder. It's not impossible.
Yeah,
it's just harder. And, the issue that I have is maybe when the Vikings think about, thinking about Kirk, I said this in the chat the other day. Kirk, when they married Kirk, it was for stability, right? It was for his, his steady income. He's not going to run around on you, all that kind of stuff, right? But now the Vikings have lost their defense. They're in a midlife crisis, and unfortunately, Kirk wants to go to church every Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning instead of doing all the fun things you want to do, right? And like that's really the issue. Is Kirk was the perfect quarterback if all the assumptions about 2018 could carry to 18, 19, 20. They just can't, and unfortunately, that leaves them with an issue with Kirk is meeting a certain expectation that's different than the assumptions that we're living in now.
Well, and that's what happens when you have a defensive head coach too. Is to your point, they brought in Kirk because they said we need stability at quarterback. But what they didn't understand is we don't have stability at the offensive coordinator position. We lost Pat Shurmur, who earned the opportunity to be a head coach in New York from his 2017 performance. And then you go and get John D. Filippo because he's the hot new next one up, which obviously didn't happen. And then they get Kevin Stefanski, who becomes the next hot head coach in waiting. So again, when you have a defensive-minded head coach and you lose this stability on offense because you want your head coach to be so focused on defense, that offense becomes less of a priority. Gary Kubiak helps you because he's less likely to go get a head coaching position.
Well, they finally made offense a priority this year.
Right.
And that's why it's all so frustrating.
Well, and so I want to hit on. So David asked a quick question, or made the mention. Talent levels do exist. The coach just can't make anybody a star. Nobody's asking Zimmer to make a majority of his defense stars. We're asking him to make competent players into average players, and some of the average players into, higher level, above average, and in some cases, elite level players. Like Xavier Rhodes obviously is playing really well this year for Indianapolis, but overall, Xavier Rhodes made an elite player 1 or 2 seasons in Minnesota. But that's taking an above average player to an elite level player. Harrison Smith is Harrison Smith. He was always going to be an elite level player. I don't think it mattered what the coach was going to do. I think it mattered. I'm not saying it doesn't matter.
You're even talking too high, Myles.
Sure, that's right.
Who's the best day 3 pick? Who's the best day 3 defender of the Mike Zimmer era?
Well, I mean, on the defense currently, Eric Wilson and
Jamar
Anthony
Steffen.
Harris. Yeah.
Anthony Harris.
But-
Anthony Harris is a good one. Yeah. That's
Anthony
a-
Harris, we got a
Anthony
year and a
Harris-
half.
Anthony Harris and Eric Wilson are really good football players for this
Yeah.
team.
But look who they play with.
And-
But look who they play with. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Like Anderson Dejo was the 11th rated safety in Pro Football
Yeah.
Focus in 2017. Look who the
Yeah.
hell he was playing next to. He was playing the next to the best fucking safety in the league, who could literally tell him,
Yeah.
dude, just don't fuck up and we'll be fine. And that's all he had.
It was
to
a
do.
bar
Not make
that Robert Blanton couldn't reach, by the way.
That's
But it was
right,
like,
yeah.
so it took a level of confidence that, like, it took a level of, like, George Iloka couldn't do it, but like I agree. Like, so the hard part is and look, I said this a long time. Like, the fact that they went in this year and said we're going to draft 15 guys and we're going to draft them at premium positions. Cleveland, Dantzler, Gladney, Jefferson, Dye, all are they're all like Wanham has been fine. You know, they've made a bunch of good picks this year. The expectation, the problem is the expectations for them were too high, right? Like the expectation, you look at the NFC North,
I don't
the
think
Vikings
they were.
have the best outlook in the entire division.
Yeah, I just don't think they were. I'm talking like, give me the 18th best defense in the NFL. I can't even ask for that. Like, they're 27th right now.
Yeah. But
Give
the
me
schedule is so hard,
18.
though. The NFL is the NFL though is extremely small sample and extremely dependent upon opponent, right? Like, you knew, like, look, week 1, Green Bay's fighting for the 1 seed. I know they're not perfect, but they're a good team. Indy is probably going to win the AFC South. Tennessee is going to win the AFC South if Indy doesn't win the AFC South. So the first 3 games of the year, you're facing teams that are as good, if not better than you. And so 0-3 was always a possibility. Houston has a top 3 football player in the entire NFL on the team, and you managed to beat him. You managed to stop his rally. And then week 5, you have a top 2 player in the NFL against you on the road when you've never won since Brad Johnson was the quarterback. And then Matt Ryan's on your schedule too, and he's a former MVP. Like, this thing was, they were going to struggle this year.
Yeah,
I think in many ways because of the path that was charted for them.
right.
But they don't get a pass for that.
So turn the corner.
Like, exactly. They don't get a pass for being year 7 of Mike Zimmer. I don't know.
Well, I mean, what wasn't the bright solution though, just to have the proper expectations? Don't trade for Yannick Ngakoue. Like, what is the value of a win out of those 5 games I just talked about? What would have been the value of winning 1 or 2 more of them in the long run right now?
I mean, I think the no-show in the first 2 weeks speaks volumes right now. They could at least be 500 or maybe even be 6-4. And I think if they had the 18th, if they had the 18th best defense in the league right now, they'd be 6-4.
Like,
we were always.
What does that matter? What does that actually matter though? Like 6-4. Like, based on what you've been saying though. Like, other than giving us like some optimism, but if they're still not very good, but they just have a couple things swing their way for the long term, like let's say playoffs and like actual long-term success in this season or seasons beyond, like what does it actually mean? Like,
if we had the 15th best defense in the league right now with how the offensive is playing,
we're probably up in the
we're talking contender.
We're at the point in that the NFC is extremely flat, and other than New Orleans, who the Vikings have matched up well with,
how is New Orleans so good? I don't understand. That team is so weird to me.
Here's the thing: do you know who their backup defensive backs are?
Yeah, PJ Williams,
Patrick Robinson, who's a starting caliber defense. Patrick Robinson would start for the Vikings. DJ Swearinger is a backup safety for them. He'd start for the Vikings, maybe. The Vikings are good at safety. They have Ken Crawley, who'd start for the Vikings. Their backups, like, they're anti-fragile. Like, this was the year to be anti-fragile and have 2 secondaries worth of starting players. That's what they have. And then you look at their defensive line. They got some Martin Harrison looking dude has 10 sacks for them. Trey Hendrickson. And he's like,
that was my guy, Myles.
I know.
Trey Hendrickson is good. Marcus Davenport, who they gave up a haul for, has graded really well. Cameron Jordan's a man, right? They have good football, and Demario Davis. I mean, I think Demario Davis is probably on the same plane as Kendricks is as far as linebackers. Like, that defense is good. And, Breeze is always a slow starter, but by the time they got, like, Michael Thomas was 3 yards of separation on every single side of him the other day. Taysom could, all he had to do is throw the ball in the ocean to get the guys, to get completions. And to his credit, he did. And now, and their offensive line's good. Like, they're good everywhere. Aside from New Orleans, though, I don't think the Vikings are 7-point underdogs or more against any other playoff team in the NFC. They went to Green Bay and were only 5.5-point dogs.
Even the Bucks, they do not match up well against the Bucks because they can't run the football against the Bucks, and they're not going to go into that game. They're not going to go into that game like the LA Rams did on Monday and say we're going to prioritize the pass and run only when we feel we need to.
Yeah,
but it's also like the Belichick approach, where even if you don't want to talk about playoffs, Jason, even if you don't want to set false expectations, if we have a competent defense right now, another thing you avoid is all this bullshit talk about needing to go out into 2021 draft and add some more defenders. Like, fuck that plan. Coach them up, Zim, and you don't get 1 year to fail and then get more resources. And that's not proof that you need more resources. That's proof that you're going to mess it up no matter how many resources you get.
And this was the litmus test for Zim, in my opinion, because they really told Zimmer, I don't know what those conversations were in Minnesota, but they obviously didn't bring in any veteran cornerbacks. They said, we're going to only focus on the young guys, the draft picks, and Mike Hughes and Holton Hill and Chris Boyd. They said, those are going to be the guys we're going to rally around. And then we're going to make sure that we have some veteran spots everywhere else. And it's clearly not working at the cornerback position overall. I still think Gladney has a bright future. I still think there's something there.
Yeah.
There's some guys that I think in the future, there's something there. But the idea that they said, hey, Zim, my assumption is they went to Zim and said, hey, we're just going to need you to coach him up. We don't have the money to pay even Mackenzie Alexander $4 million to come back.
Logan Ryan was on the street until
and that was the name I was saying for weeks that they should have just said, hey, we got a few $1 million. Come on in. But,
we can give him $2 million for a corner this year. And look, I expected the cornerbacks to, have issues going into the 2020 season.
Position to say, question mark.
But the idea is, get better, take your lumps, turn the corner, and show improvement over the 16-game schedule. Y'all, it's week 12. And there is no corner being turned. And you look at Arif Hassan wrote a great article of the defensive breakdowns on The Athletic. Basically, Mike Zimmer went into this game. He left the Bears game. He says, okay, my defense is making improvement. And he ramped up the complexity of the coverages that they tried to run against the Cowboys. And look what happened. There were missed coverages. There were missed coverages on that long Amari Cooper play down to the 1 yard line right before halftime. Dalton Schultz wide open on the game-winning touchdown. So it's a Mike Zimmer scheme thing here too, where he doesn't know the capabilities of the youngsters that he's worked with for 4 months now. He's not coaching them up.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that is maybe their internal belief is this season's a lost cause, and we're win, lose, or draw. We're going to play our style of play, very similar to how Childress treated Rad Johnson back in the day. Instead of making the offense easier for him, he just ran his offense and evaluated the other players around him. But the Ngakoue trade sort of indicates that at least internally there is somewhat of a give up on the season. The question becomes, though, I think, if Kirk Cousins is going to be the long-term quarterback of this team, the assumption has to be what? The assumption has to be that he's the quarterback that you can win with if the rest of the team is made. So if you're the Vikings,
how do you make the rest of the team?
Well, not only that, but you sort of already made that bed. There's almost nothing you can do in the 2021 draft, the 2022 draft to have the team, right? Because we're talking about the 2016, 2017 Vikings. The superstars on that team were drafted in 2012, 2013, and some of them were taken in 15. The 2016 draft contributed nothing to the Vikings in 16 and 17. And like chances are the 2021 draft, unless it's a quarterback, is not really going to contribute that greatly to the 2021 and 2022 team. So the question is, and this is really the question the Vikings have to answer, is if you're going to go into the future with Kirk Cousins, you're basically making a bet that the 15 players you drafted in 20, the guys you drafted in 19, 18, 17, those guys are the team you want to think that you're going to the Super Bowl with. And I think for almost every team in the NFL, the answer to that question is no, just based on pure math, pure numbers, pure sheer how many players work out in those drafts. So then I think the solution obviously is to go back to the drawing board and say, look, I don't even need all these picks to work out if I have a young, brilliant quarterback. And that's kind of what they have to do. And unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to be how they view it.
Long-term thinking.
It never is. They don't work that way.
No,
like
they're like shit.
It's time for a bit of short-term thinking because, we spent the majority of the show talking about how terrible things were. Flip probably lost a bit of money. My childhood best friend found me on Facebook to talk shit about the game right before the game started. And then we lost the game.
I could not get a Cowboys fan. Oh, so go ahead. I'll let you go.
Oh no, you can tell us about how much money you lost after we're done.
I could not get a Cowboys fan to bet me on the game going into it. So I had to wait until halftime until the Cowboys were up by 9?
9. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we made a bet for $50. So I lost $50, but it got me off my couch at least. Got the text flowing again.
That was such a weird game because I feel like half the time Zimmer's favored by a touchdown at home. He blows that team out. I think of like Miami in 2018 and, anytime they play Detroit at home or something. But then there was always that little bit of you. In fact, there was a ton of money on Dallas last week. They were favored. They were underdogs by 9.5. And by the time the game ended, they closed at 7, just a flat 7. And ultimately that was the sharp side. But it Zimmer as a favorite at home is just a really tough beat. And, it's good on Dallas. I mean, you chop watermelons long enough, sometimes it works out.
Is home field even a thing anymore, Eric? Is that still a thing?
I love – dude, these people are going off on Zim in the comments. I love this shit.
Home field is probably worth a point.
Okay.
It used to be worth like 2.5, 3, depending upon where. Like the U.S. Bank Stadium is worth 3.5 points prior to this year.
Okay. And what is Seattle? Seattle's got to be up there too.
Like 3.5.
Yeah.
The Vikings have been very good at U.S. Bank Stadium. I know the high-profile losses, the Bears loss and stuff are all, but like they've been very good not only at winning at home but covering the spread at home.
All right. Well, let's talk about the next one. And is this going to be the one that truly put into the coffin of the season? The Panthers. Oh, there he is.
There he is.
Oh, there he is.
He's coming back.
Zimmer's long lost son is coming back to face the team that said, hey, we don't want you anymore. We want to go with the safer option. We're going to go bring the guy in. We're going to let you go test the waters. Eric, we'll start with you.
Carolina's winning.
What are your thoughts? How is this one going to go?
I mean, if Teddy's healthy, they're winning. I mean, Teddy has been unbelievable. Like, look, he does have his 14 touchdowns there. He's stuck at 13. I think he crosses the 15 touchdown threshold just to stick it to the Vikings fans that hated on him. But no, I mean, Teddy's averaging 7.7 yards per pass attempt. He's completing 72% of his passes. He does have more interceptions than normal, but like
he's throwing
just
more.
Been really I mean, he only threw 2 last year in 5 starts. I think he had that many. He's thrown 2 interceptions in multiple games this year.
He looks like he's taking more chances.
Yeah, they're behind more, of course. This is the first bad team he's played on. But he's just, I mean, the Kansas City game, I go back and watch that. Teddy was just an absolute monster in that game. And like the dive he had I could talk forever about Bridgewater, but like he's legitimately good. And I think the really difficult part in this game is, unlike some of the teams they face this year, The Panthers are going to squeeze all of the juice out of the orange. They do it every single game. They fake punt. Their kicker can hit it from 60. They go for fourth downs. Teddy runs the ball, and when he does it with purpose. I think he's one of the best scramblers in the league now again. And when you look at that, their wide receivers, Samuel, Moore, and Robbie Anderson are probably the best trio of receivers in the entire league, save Tampa. So it's like the Vikings are going to have to score to win this game. Full stop.
I love Curtis Samuel, man. I was a fan of his coming out of college. No, I think that's such a great point.
We have not shown any. Sorry. I'll let you talk.
No.
We have though. They show Bridgewater. Bridgewater is a Viking still. He's an honorary.
Hey, just like the Dallas Cowboys, though, the Panthers have good weapons. And how are you gonna? What are the Vikings gonna do to stop those weapons? They struggled to do it on Sunday against Dallas.
There you go, Flip.
There it is. There's the team to stop the Panthers. If Christian McCaffrey's back, what are they going to do to stop him in the pass game? Like Kendrick's probably. He's the only one like him and Harrison are the ones you have like true confidence in. But like, what Robbie Anderson's proven like he's not just like a flash in the pan deep threat. Robbie Anderson's proven this year he's a do it all type of receiver. DJ Moore's the guy. You get the ball in his hands, that dude's could take it to the house anytime. Curtis Samuel's the do it all gadget guy in that team. He could do a little bit of everything.
Mike Davis is a damn good running back.
And Mike Davis can do a little bit of things too. So, like, what's the defense going to do against these guys?
It's Jonathan Stewart looking.
Flip's loving this. What are the Vikings going to do against this offense? PJ Walker even could still be a threat to this defense because he can move.
And he's not a statue in the pocket. Time. And he's throwing deep every time.
Yeah.
And he just says, "Fuck it, hey,
like,
hey, man."
This is my one chance. I'm going out like it's the XFL,
exactly.
baby.
Hey, his mama dreamed it a couple years ago, so he had to make her proud.
He had to do it.
But look, the Vikings can win this game if they score. If they try to slow this game down a little bit, and they give the Panthers defense too much, because the Panthers defense isn't good. It's like Dallas bad, right? But the problem is if you give those teams early, if you dump early down plays against those teams, then you give them a shot to get lucky on third down. And
except for Matt Stafford, who couldn't fucking help me in my fantasy, but that's neither here nor there either.
But without Galladay, that's a different team, right? Like the weapons are nowhere near as good.
They got Mohamed Sanu.
Better than 0 points good.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So Flip, I need you to tell me as we start to wind this thing down. How do you see this one going? What are your thoughts on how this game plays out? Do the Vikings bounce back? Because it does seem that the Vikings enjoy under Mike Zimmer. Like Zimmer does seem to coach, better. I don't know if his message, like the underdog thing, seems to play more to who Zimmer is than like the expectations of like the team that's being hunted. Do you think that we have a bounce back game from the Vikings, if people are writing them off after losing to a not so good Dallas team?
I think the Vikings will play better just on that narrative. Like you said, underdog mentality. Everyone's writing them off. That's typically when they bring everybody back. I mean, it's not out of the question that the Vikings beat Carolina, beat Jacksonville, and we're back at 6-6 and having this stupid old conversation all over again. But if Teddy is really an honorary Viking, he's going to team up with Matt Rule. He's going to team up with Joe Brady and give the Vikings the route that they need, that catastrophic loss that Eric was referring to make it clear that things need to change in Minnesota.
Ooh, all right, Myles. What are your thoughts? How you think this one's gonna go? Flip's, Flip's feeling like Teddy might come back and give us what Flip has been calling for a little bit. Let's fire everybody. Do you see this game going that way, or do you feel like this is a get right game for Minnesota?
It's so weird because the Vikings usually are the type of team that they usually, when they underperform, they usually do a good job of bouncing back because Zimmer's really good at playing the underdog role. Zimmer loves the underdog role. I've never seen a coach want to be the underdog more than Zimmer. I don't understand it. He loves the like when people doubt me type of mentality. So I expect there to be some of that like Zimmer, I'm going to bring it all. I'm going to make sure that, we're going to run up that score. I think the Vikings, it wouldn't surprise me if the Vikings beat this team by, 2 scores. I think their offense is good enough to do it. It's just all about where I think can the defense, like to Eric's point, can the defense get 1 or 2 stops against Teddy or PJ and that offense? We'll see, but they've been giving up how many points they give up a game right now? Like 25? I don't know the number. I haven't looked.
The Vikings?
Yeah.
27, 28, 26.
There it is.
28.
25
28
points a game.
There it is. Oh, there it is. Okay.
28
Yeah, it's not good.
game.
So, you can expect them to give up at least 24 plus points. So, I don't know. I don't know. This team is just so unpredictable. Like the Panthers aren't a great team. They're not a bottom dweller team, but they're not they're like the Vikings in that way. They're both like this. Like we're not atrocious, but we're not great. We have our moments where we can look really good, and we also have our moments where it's like, wow, like that team should just burn it all down. Like who's gonna flinch first is I guess the question. And if I had to bet between Teddy and Kirk who flinches first, who I'm taking.
Ooh, okay. There it is.
If the defense doesn't break, something else will. So, look, Zimmer's a great underdog coach, except for when his team is 4-5 and has a 30% chance of making the playoffs. Then he's not such a good underdog coach, apparently.
Expectations, Flip. Expectations.
Yeah, that 500 messed him up. Well, all right,
Mission failed.
Mission failed. We did not get to Mission 500. We failed everybody. We'll be back. We will try to do this thing again. And who knows? Like Flip said, we'll win a couple in a row and be right back here again after wins against, Theodore potentially. Jake Luton. Is he still starting for Jacksonville?
Oh, shit.
Or will the mustache be back to put us out of our misery? And
man, we really had this. The Vikings really had
the comment.
The Vikings really lucked out in the schedule and they still fucked it up, huh?
Yeah,
we really did, man.
We really did.
Like
it went from a murderous row of quarterbacks to like, oh wow, like this is set up for you to make a run, and we were like, nah, we don't want to do that. We're good. Let's lose to Andy Dalton at home
and a shitty Falcons team. Oh my god.
Big red in those ugly ass jerseys.
Anywho, gentlemen, as always, thanks for sticking with us. Vikings Jerome and everybody out there in the comments. Thank you
all in the comments,
for riding
man.
with us. Thanks for watching. Dave, I know you're back there in the truck fuming that folks are out here talking bad about your man Mike Zimmer, but you'll have your show where you can come and defend him in a couple of days, so it'll be all right. And that's it. We'll be back talking to y'all next week. Have a good one.
Skol Vikes.
Play the
Happy
music,
Thanksgiving,
man.
everyone.
Thank you for watching or listening. As always, if you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. And if you're listening to the podcast, please rate us on your favorite aggregator. Skol, everybody.